At all levels of confrontation between the US and the USSR, known as the Cold War, political, nuclear, aerospace, and all other spheres of life have turned into a battlefield where passions have reached their peak. However, there was another level of confrontation, underwater. Many scholars believe that it was this level that prevented the war from escalating into a heated conflict. Now we will discuss which of the two countries built more submarines and which had the most advanced ones. Why did the US and the USSR arm themselves with nuclear submarines? Were there direct submarine battles? And why are such gigantic submarines not currently being built? Get ready, friends, and we will continue. Starting dry statistics. Between 1945 and 1991, the U.S. built 212 submarines, of which 43 were diesel and 169 were nuclear. In turn, the USSR built as many as 727 submarines, among which 492 were classic diesel-electric and 235 were nuclear. At first glance, the gap is huge. And at a second glance, the same story. In the mid-1980s, the U.S. had between 118 and 137 battle-ready submarines in its arsenal, while the USSR had 262. Allocation of funds for the construction of new ships. By the way, this expression is used to this day, but already in the context of China. However, quantity does not always mean quality, does it? Let's evaluate the most serious vessels of both sides during the Cold War. In the United States, the Agaya-class submarines have traditionally been considered the best, the first of which was laid down in 1976. This is a huge 170-meter monster, almost 2 football fields long. If you turn such a submarine, its height will be lost even against the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower, being only 1.5 times lower. We can say that it is as if someone's inflamed consciousness squeezed the military unit, all the barracks, the canteen, and the rest house in one place, and hung rockets from above. On such submarines there is a crew of 150 people who have not only cabins, but also a spacious kitchen, places to relax, and even a gym. For the Agaya-class submarines, the crew receives oxygen directly from seawater for breathing, and a nuclear reactor requires refueling only once every 20 years. The only problem that does not allow Agaya to be in the water indefinitely is the food needed for the crew. But why was such gigantism chosen? The fact is that on board each submarine of this class are 24 Trident missiles, which are also divided into 8 warheads, with a capacity of 10 times the power of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The length of such a rocket is about 10 meters, and for both the USSR and the United States, the temptation to use nuclear weapons from anywhere in the world in stealth mode was too great. That's why the engineers didn't go to the penalty spot to create monsters like the Ohio-class subs, veritable doomsday machines capable of bringing the apocalypse to an entire continent. However, in response to U.S. plans to create a super submarine, the USSR immediately began to develop a competitor. And if the AGA was a military unit underwater, then the Shark-class submarines were entire cities. The Ohio has a displacement of 18,750 tons, while the Shark has a displacement of 48,000 tons. If the Ohio has a gym, then the Shark has oak-paneled tanning beds, a sauna, and even a living corner. It is interesting to note that although the Shark-class submarines were 3 times the size, they reached the same speed and could also dive to greater depths than their U.S. counterparts. They were inferior only in the matter of weapons and stealth. Instead of 24 missiles, as on the AGA, the Akula carried only 20 or 39 missiles. However, it could be heard almost on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. At that time, American submarines had already mastered stealth technology in the early 1980s. But these are already technical details. We are interested in history from the point of view of the dominance of the USSR in the submarine race at all levels. Why did it happen? In short, the reason for the superiority of the Soviets in the number and quality of submarines is the same as that of Germany in World War II. As we already mentioned, from 1945 to 1991, the USSR built 727 submarines, which is a significant number, comparable to what Germany built during the war, as many as 1,162 submarines. Like the USSR during the Cold War, Germany didn't do it for the good life. The main problem for Germany was that their enemies were on all sides. The US, the most powerful enemy, supplied Britain and other parts of Europe across the Atlantic. It was impossible for Germany to compete with the total power of the Allies at sea, either in the First or in the Second World War. The only way out was to go underwater and act asymmetrically. That is why the Germans built submarines one after another to strike at the Allied Atlantic convoys. This, by the way, tells an interesting film Greyhound with Tom Hanks. In the Cold War, the USSR had a similar problem. The main threat to NATO in Europe from the Warsaw Pact stood no chance. In 1980, the ADS had twice as many aircraft in Europe, 4 times as many tanks, and the same number of helicopters. Thus, the USSR had superiority in the quantity and quality of military equipment, including submarines, which gave it a dominant position in the race at all levels. If you add the United States to the equation, the situation becomes even more complicated. It was under such conditions that a plan called 7 Days was created in 1979, which was developed in secret and was in fact a simulation of the Third World War. According to Soviet strategists, this plan involved a U.S. nuclear strike starting from Poland to split the Warsaw Pact forces in half. To anticipate such a development of events, special military groups were created, and large-scale exercises were held. As part of these exercises, for 7 days the USSR Army carried out a forced march and divided NATO in half. After 9 days, it was planned to occupy northern France, and by the 10th day to reach Spain. The main task lay on the shoulders of submarines, which were supposed to cut off supply lines in the Atlantic, dividing the United States and the war in Europe. In 2005, the 7 Days Plan was revealed by the Polish authorities along with a lot of documentation. Even the analysts of the time called this plan optimistic. The modern military considers this plan an unsuccessful meme. However, the exercises within the framework of the 7 Days were held on the territory of the Warsaw Pact until 1990, i.e., year after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Perhaps the absurdity of this undertaking was compensated by the presence of Aquila-class submarines, which prevented possible warning strikes against the USSR nuclear arsenal, since some of these submarines were always at sea. This created the inevitability of an apocalypse for the planet. The same is true in the opposite direction, with Ohio-class submarines performing the task of the elusive Doomsday Riders. According to most modern historians, it was the submarine front that caused the Cold War not to turn into a hot one. It was a most interesting and significant field of confrontation between the US and the USSR. An example of such a confrontation is the Caribbean crisis of 1962, when the B-59 submarine almost accidentally fired a nuclear torpedo in the direction of American troops. This could lead to the outbreak of World War III. Thus, the use of submarines, especially the Shark and Ohio class, played a decisive role in the Cold War. They provided strategic strength and the ability to deliver nuclear strikes, which made preemptive strikes against the enemy's arsenal impossible. This was an essential factor in maintaining a balance of deterrence between the two superpowers and preventing outright military conflict. However, ironically, the most intense front of the Cold War was also the most peaceful. In the period from 1945 to 1991, the US and the USSR lost only 3 nuclear submarines as a result of accidents. No major submarine engagements were recorded on the Soviet side, with the exception of proxy conflicts such as the Korean War, where submarines were used to attack surface ships and reconnaissance. With the receipt of a nuclear arsenal, submarines moved into the category of strategic weapons and began to perform completely different tasks. However, with the development of modern technology, The era of giant submarines is a thing of the past. Despite the fact that modern technical capabilities make it possible to create submarines the size of Australia, the practical implementation of such projects is impractical. An example of this is the Joint Task Force Access 0.62 exercise, which took place in December 2005 with the participation of the U.S. Navy and other NATO countries. The aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, which is a floating city with a capacity of 5,000 people and 90 aircraft and helicopters, participated in these exercises. However, despite its huge size, thanks to the multi-layered protection system, it is almost impossible to sink it. In these exercises, a Gotlandian submarine successfully attacked an aircraft carrier that was not detected by any ship of the U.S. Aircraft Carrier Group, including the USS Ronald Reagan itself. This small submarine, weighing only 1.5 tons, with a displacement and a crew of 30 people, cost $100 million, which is 130 times cheaper than an aircraft carrier. Such small and inconspicuous submarines can effectively perform more delicate tasks. As a result, modern military technologies make it possible to build more compact and inconspicuous submarines that effectively perform their tasks. This leads to a shift in the balance of power, shifting the focus from giant submarines to smaller and more stealthy vessels. The innovative approach to the development of submarines has its own history. Already during World War II, the Japanese Army was the first to mass-produce small submarines of the Kaiden class using stealth technology. These small submarines were effective stealth killers and were used as kamikaze weapons. Now the armies are again turning to this concept. However, without the use of kamikaze, and again small submarines are becoming relevant. Thus, the history of submarine confrontation in the Cold War has become a kind of lesson for countries, demonstrating that instead of reaching peace agreements and cooperation, they spent huge amounts of money on the creation of military prodigies. Modern technology is making it possible to build more efficient and more affordable submarines, spurring a shift from gigantic craft to smaller but more discreet and more economical craft for more delicate tasks.